I'm John Law, this is Chasing Cars, and behind me is the Peugeot 5008. This particular example is the facelifted 5008 that arrived in Australia earlier this year, and you can tell it from a new grille and a whole bunch of new features inside and around the back. But we're going to come to that in a second, because first let's talk about what exactly the 5008 is, because it is a bit of an oddity in the Australian market, being slightly larger than the Toyota RAV4, slightly smaller than a Kia Sportage, and offering 7 seats, just. It's kind of a stretched version of Peugeot's 3008 to be at its most simplest, and that makes it an interesting vehicle that offers a little bit more practicality than the other Peugeots sold in Australia. So in today's video, we're going to check out that practicality. We're also going to check out how well this 51990 range-topping GT is finished inside and how it drives out on the road. But before we get to that, if you have any comments on the Peugeot 5008, please let me know in the comment section down below, and we'd love it if while you're down there you could hit subscribe as well if you haven't done so already. Now, the facelifted Peugeot 5008 looks a hell of a lot better in my opinion, and that's because Peugeot has ditched that slightly gawky smiley face of the original car, and instead we've got this really cool grille that sort of fades into nothing into the sides of the car, and the lion-inspired scar from the Lion King saber-toothed cuts there that work as the LED daytime running lights. Now that's all well and good, but unfortunately down the side of the 5008, things start to get a little bit more peculiar. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of this slab-sided van look. It's quite clearly a stretched 3008, but that does come with its advantages when you get inside, as we're about to do right now. So straight away, when you jump into the cabin of the 5008, it really does a good job of echoing what's going on outside with a bit of funky French flair and some interesting design touches that make it quite endearing. It's definitely not a run-of-the-mill mid-size SUV, and this one especially so, because this car we're sitting in has $3,590 worth of quilted Napa leather seats, which have electric adjustment, heating, and a massage function as well. They even have under thigh support so that tall guys like me can get comfortable. Now, speaking of that, this does have quite a funky driving position, which you'll probably be aware of if you've driven any contemporary Peugeot product, and that is that the steering wheel actually sits below the digital driver's display. Now, that takes some getting used to, but for me, it actually works quite well, and it means that my eyes are kept at a better level where I can just see the speed, revs, and navigation directions which pop up in this digital driving display just below my line of sight, and I think it's actually quite a clever idea. Now, next to that, we've got a new 10-inch touchscreen here, which controls all the infotainment settings. You do have these funky little shortcut buttons down here as well, which kind of look like a cat's claw, at least in my book. You can let me know what you think of them, whether they're tacky or cool. And then you've got climate control stuff just below that, which all works through the touchscreen. And again, like the driving position, takes a couple of minutes to wrap your head around, but once your head's there, it works cool. Now, something I'm not so convinced about is this wood trim. It's not as bad as it is in a Kia Sportage, but it's still definitely not super high quality. But that's the only thing that stands out in this car as not being of super high quality. All the leather on the steering wheel is nice, and the armrest as well is super soft to the touch, and the doors as well. Soft touch on the top, and the actual capping of the dashboard just feels really nice. You do have some fake stitching and stuff, but on the whole, the front cabin of the 5008 is actually really well thought out. You've even got stuff like wireless charging, USB port, 12-volt socket, and this little tray here, which has even more hidden storage for stuff that you might not want to be seen by passers-by. Now, in 5-seat configuration, this 5008 really has a party trick here in the back. As you can see, I have oodles of space in front of my 6'2" frame behind my own driving position. I mean, look at all that knee room. It's crazy good. Now, toe room is a little compromised, but headroom, there's plenty of it. So I would be really happy back here for long periods of time. It would actually make quite a cool little rideshare car, because you do have these Napa leather seats back here as well, and they're super comfortable, very supportive, and you've got almost a proper middle seat, and each of the seats is also on its own slider. So I can slide right forward, make some room to accommodate people in the back row, which, as we'll get to in a minute, is really rather tight, so you need to do that. In ultimate comfort configuration, it's really good. You've also got these flip-down tray tables, which do actually encroach on legroom for me a little bit, though if you're a little shorter, you probably won't have that issue. You could put, I don't know, airline packaged meals here, or a computer to work on the move. Pretty neat, not quite as cool as the Citroen C4's tablet holder, I must admit. You've also got vents back here with adjustable fan speed and 2 USB charging sockets, a couple of little flaps to keep the sun off the baby's face, and on this GT model we also get tinted windows in the back as standard. That wood grain continues back here, though the doors do move to hard touch right at the top, yet down here there's still a nice really comfy armrest, good door bins as there are in the front, and you do get to enjoy a pretty good sound setup back here from the Bose stereo that gets included in that $3,590 interior package. Now, here in what my sister used to call the back, the Peugeot 5008 has its party piece to show off, and that is that I can just about fit behind the second row at 6'2" with this seat slid quite a long way forwards. Now, it's a pretty compromised position for the middle seat, but if you've got kids or shorter humans, it's actually going to be fairly doable, with the added advantage that if you want to have a 6-seat setup, you can actually fold down the middle seat independently, and I can lounge back here quite comfortably, enjoying looking at my magnetized seatbelt holder. I've also got a 12-volt socket over here and a drink holder that could hold a drink that was maybe 80 milliliters. So it feels like a mini place back here, but the important thing about the 5008 is that it does have this extra added practicality, and I reckon that's pretty cool. Now let's check out how the baby seats fit in this big old SUV. Fitting both the forward-facing and the rear-facing baby seats into this Peugeot 5008 GT is an absolute dream. It's so easy, these massive doors open super wide, and as you can see, the width of this car means that I can easily sit between these two seats. Though, if I had one complaint, it's that the passenger's front seat had to slide forward a little bit to make room for this baby seat, yet I was still fairly comfortable. So I reckon that's a big win for the Peugeot. Now, like in the rear seats, the slightly odd proportions really pay off at the back of the 5008 in GT specification, because popping this electrically operated tailgate, which operates with no beeps, reveals a rather vast boot. So in 5-seat configuration, you've got 591 litres of cargo space, which is pretty much best in class. Now you can see we've got one of the third row seats up back here, and space is pretty tight behind that. But you should be okay to fit some school bags or kit bags after picking your kids up from sport if you need to, because really these 7th seats are reserved for occasional use only, and certainly not that well suited to adults. Anyway, let's shut that boot and talk about how much the 5008 costs to run. The claimed fuel consumption figure for this petrol 5008 GT is 7 litres per 100 kilometres, and we got 7.7 litres per 100 Ks in our testing. Now, servicing intervals are pretty long at 12 months or 20,000 Ks, and 5 years of cap price servicing is going to set you back $2,962 and will take you 100,000 Ks. So the 5008 has a bit of French panache outside and inside, but does it have it when it comes to the driving experience? Well, it does, and I'm glad, very glad indeed, to be able to say that, because everything about this car feels decidedly French, and that's pretty cool. It means it feels very different from the usual raft of competitors from Germany, Japan, and Korea. It's got its own thing going on, and that starts with the fairly small 1.6 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder engine, which kicks out 121 kilowatts of power and 240 newton meters of torque to the front wheels via a 6-speed torque converter automatic. Now, it's not bad, but it's definitely not the fastest in the bunch. It's got a bit of mid-range grunt, but pushing around this 1493 kilogram mid-size SUV, it does struggle a little bit to get the best out of it, and it's not really worth revving it out either. At least the paddles are fairly responsive to manual commands, but I do wish this car had the 8-speed torque converter that's found in the C4 that I reviewed a little while ago, because that gearbox would just, with its extra ratios, be able to take a bit more advantage of this car's peak power band. Now, the engine itself is at least pretty refined, though ultimately with more than 1 or 2 people on board, I would go for the diesel. It's a little bit more expensive to buy, but the extra wave of torque you get from that car really suits the sort of low-pin cruising personality that you kind of expect from a French SUV, and luckily that is here in spades when it comes to the suspension as well, because it's really sits flat, this car. It's got a nice suspension tune, not quite as soft as you'd get in this car's twin, the Citroen C5 Aircross, but certainly not as sharp-edged as some vehicles, and with plenty of control. You can place it on the road with real accuracy owing to this small steering wheel, and it kind of encourages you to drive like you want a French car to encourage you to drive, and that is a bit on the limit. It's cool like that. It encourages you to sort of zip into gaps and go quickly around corners and sort of just make the most of your driving experience. And I really like that. It's a very endearing car to drive. Now, if I do have one little complaint, it's that although most of the road noise, wind noise and engine noise is really well suppressed in this 5008 GT, there is a little bit of torsion beam boom and sort of general cabin resonance in this vehicle, I think owing to its very van-like proportions, which allow a lot of room for sound to echo around in. And as for safety, this car is rated as 5 stars by Australia's peak testing body ANCAP, but it doesn't have absolutely everything you'd expect to see. It is based on the PSA EMP2 platform, which has been around since 2013, so not the freshest stuff on the market, but it does have AEB with day and nighttime pedestrian and cyclist detection. You've got a lane keep assist system, adaptive cruise control, which works via this stalk behind the steering wheel here, which is a bit of a throwback to the past, and you've also got blind spot monitoring as well. So on the whole, I actually really find the Peugeot 5008 GT really enjoying to drive. Sure, it's not perfect, but it's definitely got a little bit of pizzazz that a lot of competitors in this class simply don't. So what do we reckon of the Peugeot 5008 GT? Well, I reckon it pulls off the so French, so chic pretty well for a 7-seat SUV, especially from the front and rear. It looks pretty cool outside, and that cabin is really rather premium and does go some way to justifying that fairly high price tag. Now, am I saying this thing's going to beat the Toyota RAV4 and Kia Sportage in the Australian sales charts? I don't think so, but if you like the look of this thing, then definitely it's worth taking it for a drive because it drives really sweetly. Now, of course, I'd love to know what you think of the Peugeot 5008 GT in the comments section down below. Have you bought one or have you considered buying one? Let me know. And while you're down there, we'd also love it if you could hit that subscribe button because it really helps us out. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.